partly a recognition that this is a big and long war, and it will roll into next year and quite possibly beyond that. I think it also recognizes a change in the support that Ukraine needs from the emergency reaction of the first 6 months, which was mostly about giving stuff that was, on the shelf or armed forces training, to where we're headed now, which is mobilizing our industry in order to support the Ukraine war effort.
And so what's that going to look like in Britain, do you think?
So some of it will be about buying stuff that the Ukrainians need that's made in other countries. And some of it is about mobilizing UK industry to make shells and missiles and ammunition. And some of it is about supporting the training effort. And the UK is one of a very few number of countries that is training Ukrainian soldiers here in the UK.
And are there risks for us in terms of provoking Russia and Vladimir Putin? If we start committing money, but if we start sort of building things, buying things to directly go to Ukraine, rather than using our own existing force, if you like, but literally sort of funding the war effort, is there any risk inherent in that for Britain in that, or have we sort of passed that point, do you think?
I think there's actually much less risk given the revealed state of the Russian armed forces and the fact that the Russian armed forces are very heavily focused on Ukraine. Their capacity to be difficult to NATO is currently much reduced. That will change as Russia puts right its many military failings, but right now the risk is actually less. The greater risk is if, as is necessary, the Ukrainian as a nation mobilize their people in hundreds of thousands to put them in uniform, and then that is supported by Western will, money, equipment, ammunition, logistic help. That will create an offensive force that the Russian military probably can't deal with in Ukraine. And the greater risk is that if Ukraine is successful, as we intend, and as is important for our own security, values, and prosperity, then the Russian response, perhaps next year when it's on the back foot and being defeated, that could be quite unpredictable and dangerous in Ukraine.
I don't know if you've seen a column by William Hague, former Foreign Secretary in the Times today. He sort of runs through possible options for Putin at this point. The first, he says, the full mobilisation of Russia's economy and society for all-out conventional war, which doesn't, he argues, isn't particularly viable because Russians aren't necessarily full square behind this. The second is to threaten to employ or actually use a tactical nuclear device, but that, as he describes, is the craziest option. And the third is to sort of call it a day, try and live to fight again in the future, regroup, retreat, goodwill gesture, whatever you might call it, and step back from the brink. I just wondered what you thought was the most likely course of action that the Russian president might take at this stage, given that Ukraine has clearly put up a much better fight than perhaps anyone expected.
Well, I'm not sure if the most likely and the most sensible for President Putin are the same thing. The most sensible thing to do would be to very quickly try and annex the parts of Ukraine that Russia sits on, that Russia wants as part of Russia, and try and call it a day. But President Putin knows that Ukraine and the rest of us will reject that. He can't decide the war is over just because he's now beginning to lose. But the most sensible thing would be to try and contain it. The most likely thing I think right now is that he will hold out, and that will raise the prospect next year of the use of a small nuclear weapon, a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, or the resort to chemical weapons. And one of the things we all need to focus on now is for the US and Europe, the UK, and China to point out to President Putin that he cannot go down that road at a price that Russia can possibly bear in terms of its isolation in future.